the little stone house. "I wish we had a house of our own to live in," said Mr. Doe. "I do too," said Mrs. Doe. "This place is getting more crowded every day." "I'd like a room of my own," said Dotty Doe. "Me too," said Bobby Doe. Mr. Doe and his family lived in a small apartment in a big city. The living room was small, the bedrooms were smaller, and the kitchen was smallest of all. Every Sunday the family looked for a house in the country. Some were too big, and some were too little. Some were too old and needed repairs, and some were too new and cost too much. They looked at all kinds of houses, a Dutch house, a Spanish house, and a made-over barn, but none were just right. Whenever they saw builders at work, they stopped to watch them. One day, Mr. Doe said, "Why don't we build a house ourselves? Then we can have just the kind we want." "I can help," said Bobby. "And I can too," said Dotty. "It would be fun," said Mrs. Doe. "Do you think we could do it?" "Other people have done it," said Mr. Doe, "and I'm willing to try. We'll read books, draw our own plans, and we can watch masons, carpenters, electricians, and plumbers at work and learn from them. We have enough money in the bank to buy a little land. I'm sure we can build a house, and we'll have a lot of fun, too." "We are going to build our own house," they told their friend Henry, who lived in the country. "Building is very hard work," said Henry. "Do you know anything about it?" "Not much," said Mr. Doe, "but we can learn. First, we have to find a lot to build on." "I don't know anything about building," said Henry, "but I will help you find some land." Some of the places he showed them were too low in the valley, and some were too high in the hills. It was hard to find just the place they had dreamed of. One day they drove along a winding road. They saw a sign, "This property for sale." "Wait," said Mr. Doe, "what about this place?" They stopped by the sign. It was a hillside covered with trees, brambles, and weeds. "Oh, no one wants that old quarry and frog pond," said their friend. "No one could build a house on such a lot." "There are trees to climb," said Bobby. "There are birds and flowers," said Dotty. "There's a stream and a waterfall," said Mrs. Doe. "It is just the place we want," said Mr. Doe. "We'll buy it." The next day Mr. Doe went to the bank and drew out some money and bought the place that no one else wanted. Mrs. Doe rented a cottage nearby, a small cottage nearby where they could live until the house was finished. It was time for Mr. Doe's vacation, so they moved to the country. In the village hardware store, Mr. Doe bought a sickle and a scythe, an axe, and pruning shears to clear the land. "I hear you have bought the old quarry," said the storeman. "You can't build a house there." "We're going to try," said Mr. Doe, smiling. The whole family helped to clear the lot. Swish and cut, swish and cut. The children worked hard to make a path through the brambles. Dotty found some bees, and Bobby got into some poison ivy. Swing and chop, swing and chop. Mr. and Mrs. Doe cleared a wide place to build on. "Whee!" said Dotty. "Look what we found!" Under the tangle of vines and brambles near a great willow tree they had uncovered a bubbling spring. "Wonderful," said Mrs. Doe. "We'll buy a pump and bring pure, cool spring water into our house." "Fine," said Mr. Doe. "We'll build our house of stone, for there is so much of it right here." They worked hard all day, every day on the lot. At sundown they went back to the cottage for a nice hot bath and a good supper. Then they drew plans and plans for the new house. When they went to the village, they watched masons at work and asked a lot of questions and learned how to mix cement with sand to make a good mortar and how to lay stone. Then they were ready to start building. They laid out the floor plan with a rule and a square and marked it with some stakes and a ball of string. Mr. Doe brought a pick and a crowbar, 2 long-handled shovels, and a wheelbarrow. Ooh, my, this page is dirty. Then they dug the trenches for the foundation. It was hard work, and they all had lame backs and blisters on their hands. But it was fun, too. When the noonday sun was high over their heads, they put down their tools and ate lunch by the spring. Then one day, when the trenches were ready, Mr. Doe brought many bags of cement, a truckload of sand, and another of gravel. Mixing the cement, sand, and gravel was heavy work, so Mr. Doe hired Big Mike to help. Bobby brought the water from the spring. Mr. Doe wheeled the barrow and dumped the mix in the trench. Dottie helped Mrs. Doe tamp it down with a shovel. When the cement set, it was hard and strong. Mr. Doe decided to build the fireplace first. Bobby and Dottie mixed the cement. Mrs. Doe helped Mr. Doe lay the stone. When the fireplace was finished, Mr. Doe made a fire, and smoke came out of the chimney, just as they had planned. "Hooray!" they shouted. "It works!" That night they had a picnic supper and roasted corn in the new fireplace. Now they started to build the walls. Mr. Doe wanted to get the roof on before cold weather. He hired Joe and Rocco and Sam to help. They all worked hard and fast. By the time the leaves of the maple had turned scarlet and the birch a pale gold, they were ready for the floor and the ceiling beams. Some of the trees had been trimmed to size at the sawmill. They were hauled up the hill by strong horses. The beams were very heavy, and it took Mr. Doe and Mrs. Doe and Bobby and Dottie and big old Johnson and his Derrick and his 5 children to hoist the beams up the walls. When the beams were all in place, they laid the floor. Then Mr. Doe finished the high gables and put the ridgepole in place. Now the house was ready for the roof. The days grew shorter. "We must get the roof on before snow comes," said Mr. Doe. They measured and cut the rafters on the ground and fastened them to the ridgepoles and the side walls. Mr. Doe nailed wide sheets of plasterboard on the rafters to make a fine ceiling and covered them with tar paper to protect them from rain. Dottie and Bobby helped all they could after school. Many good friends who came to the country for the weekends helped too. Some cut boards for the roof. Some nailed them down firmly. Shingling was fun, and with many hands to help, the roof was soon finished. Now that the roof was on, the fireplace kept the place warm, for the days were cold. Mr. Doe marked off the rooms on the floor and put up the studs for the walls. Bobby and Dottie helped nail the big sheets of wallboard to the studs. There was a big kitchen next to the living room downstairs and 4 bedrooms on the floor above with a bathroom off the hall. "Fine," said Mrs. Doe. "Now we all have our own rooms. There is a guest room too, and storage space in the attic." John the plumber helped to lay the iron and brass pipe and set up the bathroom fixtures and put in the kitchen sink. Mr. Doe brought coils of electric wire and cable. Everybody helped, and soon there were lights in all the rooms. There's still a lot of work to do. We have to plaster the walls, put up trim, hang doors, put on hardware, and paint the woodwork. But why don't we move in? I must go back to work in the city soon, but we can finish the house little by little. "Hurrah!" shouted Bobby. "Let's move in right away." And they did. All their friends helped them move. Henry, who had said that no one could build on such a lot, helped to carry up the stove. "Isn't it wonderful?" said Mrs. Doe. "We are in our own home just in time to celebrate Thanksgiving Day." Mr. Doe bought a big turkey and Mrs. Doe roasted it in the fireplace. The kitchen smelled of sauces and spices. Mr. Doe made a long plank table for the feast. On Thanksgiving Day, Mrs. Doe covered it with nuts and fruit and good things to eat. Friends came from near and far, little friends and big friends. They sat elbow to elbow on the benches by the table. They ate sweet pickles, green olives and ripe ones, salted nuts and stuffed celery, hot buttered buns, ham and turkey with mashed potatoes and dressing, and pudding and pie. Everyone admired the little house on the hill. Mrs. Doe lit the candles at twilight, and they gathered round the fire. Uncle Bill played the accordion, and Mrs. Doe brought out his banjo. They all sang the old-time songs until the hour was late. It was a jolly party in the little stone house on the hill. "It is so good to have a home all our own," said Mr. Doe, "and someday I'll have a workroom." "We will never be crowded here," said Mrs. Doe, "and I'll have a big garden." "I think it is wonderful to have a room of my own," said Dottie. "Me too," said Bobby. Everyone was happy in the little stone house on the hill. The end. The Little Stone House, featuring Snow White. This book came from the North Lisbon. This book came from the North Lisbon School in Lisbon, Wisconsin. Excuse me, honey. We're going to turn the page. The Little Stone House. The Story of Building a House in the Country by Berta and Elmer Hader. Can you hop up? The MacMillan Company, New York. Published in 1944. Second printing, February 1945. A surprise for Leota with love and affection. And read for you by Rachael the Library Fairy. And I hope you loved it.